you. Let me ask you this. What do you think of a chap who got hired as a television director at the age of 19 and was given Joan Crawford to direct in his first assignment? This was an episode of Night Gallery. He moved from there to episodes of Marcus Welby, Owen Marshall, Columbo, Name of the Game, and of course he was fairly experienced when he got that job at 19 because he had taken over the family's home movie equipment at a very early age, I think 4 probably, and by the time he was in high school he had made dozens of 8mm and 16mm shorts, and he even made a 2.5-hour 8mm epic called Firelight, all about a team of scientists who were investigating mysterious lights in the night sky and things with jaws that came out of them and gobbled things up. He used some of these images later to good advantage as the director of things you might have heard of more than you have Firelight, Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, to name a couple. He's also the director of the Sugarland Express, 1941, and his latest movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, sounds like the kind of thing I wish I could see and be in at the same time. This is just an open plea for a job. Will you welcome, please, the incredible Steven Spielberg. Mostly accurate? 90%? Okay. I've never seen Firelight. I don't know if anyone in our audience has. Is that...
No, they haven't.
Was that... how old were you when you made that flick?
I was 16.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a...
Is it still...
It's still around. I lost 2 reels. You know, when you lose 8mm reels, there are no negatives, so it's gone forever. So only about half the film exists.
That's right. The negative becomes the film, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Whatever comes out of the camera store is that's your negative.
Say, among the many things we have in common, one of which is having loved cereals, S-E-R-I-A-L-S.
Yes, I was about to say, yeah.
Make that clear, yes. He hasn't gone into the food business yet. Yeah, is sneaking into places you're not supposed to be at a precocious age. Yeah. I used to love to sneak into studios and usually television. We could compare methods or something.
Yeah.
How'd you work it and what was successful?
Well, I snuck into the studios. Before that, I would sneak into theaters to watch movies for free. I remember at one point, it was a terrible story to tell, but I snuck into a theater in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was raised, to see the Michael Rennie production of The Lost World. It's the remake of The Lost World. And I remember going there with a real concoction in like a brown paper bag of cream corn and Parmesan cheese, and making horrible retching sounds from the balcony and squeezing it over on all the people sitting below me, and creating an enormous chain reaction. I mean, upstaging the entire movie, and the lights came up in the theater, and they stopped. It was an enormous fiasco.
And people were saying someone vomited on me, and I wanted to...
Exactly. That was my first brush with theatrics.
That was your first evidence of wit on your part.
Yeah, yes, as I evidenced in 1941.
I always heard of that prank, but I never saw anybody do it. I know one even worse, but we'll leave that for some other time. We'll leave that for cable television. I used to sneak into things like the Martha Raye show and the Jackie Gleason show in New York and see. And the way I did it was somehow I managed to get hold of an envelope from the network with the symbol on it. Walk up to the stage door, and just say, "Hi," to the stage doorman, and he'd go, because they don't want to stop someone they shouldn't and offend them. And I often always got in, and I was often thrown out, however, when they found me crouching somewhere in the place.
I did the same thing with Universal Studios. Very early on, when I was going to Long Beach State College, I snuck onto the lot wearing a coat and tie and carrying a briefcase. And I did the same thing, a little eye contact, a little briefcase, a little tie, and I got right in. And that was fine for about 3 months, and then I was thrown off the lot.
Another good trick is don't look where you're going, because that indicates that you're familiar with the area, even though you're not. Now, you can have some accidents this way, but there's a way of walking. I'm going to give my microphone its first test, but if I'm in a new place, then I would tend to walk, looking around to see where I'm going and where the chair is. But if I'm in a familiar place, I can just walk along and, do this. Stuff like that. That never fails. I mean, that always, no one ever questions you if you walk like you know this area so well that you don't have to look where you're going.
Yeah, but if you bump into somebody, it creates such a stir. It's almost a smoke screen you can sneak out of.
And you got to have a line ready, like, sorry I bumped into you, I found work.
Getting off the tour bus helps, and sneaking around the back of a soundstage, that helps a lot. I've done that a few times.
Is this dangerous, what we're doing, telling people that you're going to have a lot of sneaking people now on your set saying, well, you did it?
It happens all the time. I get people who try to break in. They say, well, you did it all those years ago. And I say, yeah, but I wasn't I was in control then, and you're not. Get out.
Yeah. Doesn't necessarily work for everybody. You know, now, what was Duel the full title?
Duel, yeah.
Yeah. That's the one, if you ever saw it, you can never forget it. There's certain films and things that have images in them, or you just can't get it out of your head. It's like a nightmare almost. Mm-hmm. And that it was Dennis Weaver.
Yeah, Dennis Weaver, and
followed by
a very large, ugly Peterbilt truck.
Yeah, and this ominous thing, this truck, this trailer truck, whatever, kept following him for no reason that he knew.
Yeah.
And that just is a wonderful, it was wonderfully made.
I always sort of thought of it as sort of a General Motors Godzilla movie. So it was
it had Ralph Nader in
it had Ralph
instead
Nader
of Dennis Weaver.
Right.
But has that idea been around before? Has there ever been?
Richard Matheson wrote the short story for Duel.
It came from
a short story that was in Playboy magazine a number of years ago, 10, 11 years ago. Yeah. And I first read it in Playboy, and then George Eckstein, the producer, purchased it for ABC, and I got involved. I was so excited about the story. I went over to his office and asked him if he had found a director yet. And he said, no, were you looking for a job? And I had only finished 2 or 3 TV episodes with Joan Crawford and a Marcus Welby and A Name of the Game. These are old shows back in the the early 70s. And we got together on it. And it became the challenge of my life, because part of it was having the network breathing down your back, wanting you to finish the show on schedule. And I was 2 days over schedule. I shot it in 14 days instead of 12 days, and they thought I was the worst creature to walk the face of the network. They thought
because of 2 extra days?
2 extra days we took to make the movie that really should have taken about 30 days to shoot. And so I didn't work very much in television after that. I found that the pressure was too enormous.
Did Jaws take more than 14 days?
Yeah, so 14 days with a rap party. It was about the length of the rap party for that film. We were so happy to get off Martha's Vineyard.
I asked innocently.
155 days, actually.
Was that a record for you at that point?
It was a record for a lot of people, here and abroad. Yeah.
I was on Martha's Vineyard.
I saw you on Martha's Vineyard with Robert Shaw.
Yeah, and I was doing a thing with Walter Cronkite. That's what. And I talked about Jaws being made, and I went over there and I ran into Shaw, whom I also did show with. He was in trouble because if he worked much longer, he would lose his, whatever it is, the complicated thing with taxes and so on, where he stayed in the country too long.
He put all his money in Ireland, and he didn't pay taxes, British taxes. But if he stayed too long in America, everything we paid him for Jaws would go to the IRS. And he was, every day he would remind me that he could only be there 1 more week, and we were only in our 40th day of shooting. And he was saying, if I'm here 1 more week, I lose all of my salary. And in fact, he lost about 3/4 of the money to the IRS because he overstayed his legal welcome.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, but I had an image of you which I'll never forget.
Oh, please tell me. I love those.
You came to visit Robert and Walter Cronkite, and you were standing on one of the picture boats watching.
Yes.
And you had a little parka on, you had a little scarf on, and you were standing there all by yourself.
A little one, not mine?
No, it was. And the whole crew was watching you with great envy, and I was wondering why the crew was staring at you. Certainly they recognized you as being who you are, but then I began to look into their eyes and I realized that you got to go home that night, and everybody else had to stay for 6 more months.
It was like someone visiting a prison.
A prison, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. How did you deal with that psychology? I mean, everybody with that burden on them must have.
We had people crack up. We really had people crack up. We had our gaffer, our lighting gaffer, go a little crazy, and he began wearing his baseball cap backwards, and he got a bullhorn, electric bullhorn, and began narrating the making of the movie, sitting on a small stepladder on a pitching and rolling boat, without just narrating who was coming aboard and who was doing this and who was making a mistake and picking up a plant, which is another union. You're not supposed to pick up a plant if you're a carpenter.
Yeah.
And
too much pressure.
Too much pressure. We had people go back to L.A. With their eyes swimming.
Well, of course, the old-timers were saying, boy, they're these smart-ass people from Hollywood, they didn't even know about tides.
You're right. Yeah, the Coast Guard also came over one day in a helicopter with a bullhorn, laughing over the bullhorn. They keyed the mic and began to laugh, and we had to endure that for 5 minutes.
What were the... Did you get it on tape? What were the natural wonders and phenomena that you didn't know about? Besides tides and sky, I guess, were the things.
Well, the one natural phenomenon that none of us had any idea was that we couldn't walk on the water. We all assumed that we could get out to the ocean. It would be like working on dry land, or at worst, like on, shallow jello.
Yeah.
And it turned out that when you've got your boats in the water and the wind starts to blow, all the anchors move. Mm-hmm. And when you're all set for a shot, there's a camera boat, and there's a lighting boat with a generator, and there's the picture boat with the actors on it. And when the wind began to blow, each boat would move in a different direction, usually away from the center. And I often was shooting a horizon line, where before there was Scheider, Dreyfuss, and Shaw, there was nothing but a horizon. And it was chaos. It was total chaos. None of us, we should have really cooperated with the Coast Guard and let them show us how to make the movie, because none of us were seaworthy.
That would have saved a month, maybe, or something?
It would have saved a few weeks. The shark not working is what cost most of the time.
Well, the mechanical
shark never
not
worked.
working. I thought you meant that a live shark went on strike.
No.
It's about the only union that hasn't.
No. Brian De Palma, who came to the location once to visit me and left the very next day, went back and told all his friends his impression. He saw the first test of the shark, and he went back to New York, and he said, words won't describe it. And he made a hand gesture. He said, this was the first test of the shark, and the jaws open like this, and then I say, okay, close the jaws, and it's like so. And
I hate a slack judge.
Yeah, me too. 6 months of this.
But how do you ever get a shot from when the camera's on one boat and the actors are on another, unless it's dead calm, because the camera's always going to be moving?
Well, actually that adds to the excitement. That's very good. If it's dead calm, or if the camera's too locked down to the boat, you don't have a feeling that you're on the water. It could even look like a process shot, like a rear projection effect.
So a little movement.
So a little movement is great. As a matter of fact, the man who photographed Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, Michael Chapman, was the camera operator on Jaws, and he's an extraordinary operator. He handheld 70% of the movie just to keep some movement in the frame and still maintain a flat horizon line.
Would you ever do that on land, put a little movement in just to get a little, or would it have to be explained by being on water?
No, I haven't made my personal movie yet. That's a personal movie effect right there. Is when you walk into a room with a camera and it's all sort of verite. But I've always been a little more slick in terms of on land wanting to lock the camera down and essentially standardize most of the movements.
How long has that remarkable thing been around where they can, what's it called? The
Luma crane?
No, it's a camera that a man wears and can move around with, but it's so counterweighted and has such an elaborate rig. Steadicam. That even if he were to move like that, the camera won't, because it compensates some way.
Yeah, you can't shoot a love scene with that camera. It's awful. You have to.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you can follow people down corridors and up staircases. The great effect in Rocky, which I think sold Steadicam to the industry, was when Stallone runs up the stairs and turns. That's a man running next to him as fast as Stallone is going with the camera handheld.
That would have been possible before.
No, not before at all. You would have had to build an intricate dolly track and counterweighted because you're going up a 30-degree slope. It would have been impossible.
Gee, that's interesting stuff. I like all of that stuff. I remember, yes, it was the day as you were shooting where he slides toward the jaws of the shark, I believe, and the sinking tug.
I'm sorry you were there for that.
And,
that was a terrible day.
Yeah, there was an old sea captain there, a real one, who was not impressed at all by the movie people.
Yeah.
They never are. They make a point of that.
That's right. Yeah. But they make a lot of money by taking greenhorns like us fishing for shark out off Montauk,
Oh yeah, that's where they are.
Yeah.
I know a pilot. Sharks became very fashionable because of your movie, and there's a pilot who flies from the point of Long Island to New York and back. And he said, half the time I see sharks in among the bathers at Jones Beach. So they don't know they're there. They're always around.
Yeah, well, sharks are like sharks are like men of war in the water, or bass, or just another sea animal, and they really don't. They don't attack man. The great white shark has been most, and much maligned for going after man. In fact, he does, but there are fewer of them, so we hear less about it.
That's right.
Yes.
But if they're right among those bathers all the time, it proves that they don't always attack. Well, what did you do with your non-working shark problem? Did the shark's mechanical specialist have to rebuild the thing constantly?
Well, the first mistake with the shark was they made a big mistake and they built it for fresh water. Now, they all knew we were going to the Atlantic Ocean, but for some reason they built it for fresh water.
What's the difference?
Well, electrolysis is a major problem when you get salt into all the machinery, into the electrical system.
Sure.
And so they tested the shark for the first time in the water, and we had at least 20 boats of tourists who had gathered around an area to watch the shark work. And we had the shark on a huge 90-foot platform, 30 feet underwater, and at the press of a hydraulic button and pulling a lever back, supposedly the shark comes shooting out of the water head first. And this has absolutely happened, because David Brown and Dick Zanuck were there watching with me. The shark came up tail first. It just came up tail first, and it was like it was like a 25-foot moon. And all of the tourists out there essentially, you know, went back. I guess we read Peter Betterstein's book in hopes that the book would be more exciting than the movie. But that was the first test of the shark. It was a total disaster. We never fixed the shark, but in the cutting room, I was able to use so little of it and imply so much more that when you finally do see the shark, it's a little bit lethargic, and that's where the story demanded that I show more than just the dorsal fin. And that was the last few minutes of the movie.
Nobody suggested using a real trained shark or anything.
They did, as a matter of fact. They did suggest
Serious?
that. We, Dick Zanuck, who is an amazing guy, I think he's one of the best producers in the world today, and he had a great old Hollywood idea. He said, why don't we use a real shark, but when we shoot all the scenes with Richard Dreyfuss in the cage, we'll use a midget in the cage and build a half-size cage, so it'll make a 15-foot great white shark look like a 30-foot great white shark. So I said, well, why don't we try it? So Universal spent some money, and we actually went to Australia with a midget who told us that he knew how to scuba dive. As a matter of fact, I was interviewing midgets one day for this part. Absolutely a true story. And one of the small gentleman came into my office covered in blood. He had cuts here, he had cuts here, his arms were cut. And I said, what happened to you? He said, well, look, I really got to get this job, and I just racked up my car in front of the Universal Studio Tour gate, and I got into a traffic accident, but I had to come in to get the job. I didn't want to be late. It was 3 o'clock. He was going to be late. So we had the ambulance attendants come around to my office to take care of him. And I assumed anybody who was that brave to leave an accident to get a job, to go into the water with a real live shark, deserves the job. So we sent him to Australia with Ron and Valerie Taylor, who I'm sure you must have heard of.
Yeah? Oh, yes. You see them in film. You see her down among the sharks.
Blue Water, White Death.
Yeah.
Yeah, she plays with the sharks.
Yeah.
So, it's like a Joan Emery of underwater, that sort of thing.
You realize how many bleeding midgets are going to audition for you now?
Well, the thing was, he was drinking coffee one day after 2 days of having no luck even finding a great white, and there were some very bright metallic miniature cages in a small boat being towed by the larger boat in Australia. And one of the sharks, being attracted by the lure of this silver, came out of the water and bit the cage in the boat and took the cage out of the boat. And the guy suddenly was no longer there. The midget was gone. They couldn't find him. He had locked himself into the head of the ship and wouldn't come out. And Valerie had to take a butter knife and unlock the door and make him aware that he was being paid $10,000 to perform That's Incredible.
Are you saying that the shark reached up into the boat and took
it was very
cage,
easy.
or a cage that was being dragged?
It was a cage that was being dragged that the shark got hold of and tore to pieces.
Yeah.
The cage that he was going to go in.
My image is that sharks get up into the boat that I'm in and start after me. I've had that.
Yeah, that's
the best thing to do when you see a shark, if you're in the water, is the first rule is to get into the center of a large city. That's my advice.
Well, Jaws 3 is about a land shark. It's about it's about a shark who is killed in Jaws 2, becomes a ghost, and haunts the city.
One of the dread land sharks. I thought they were all agents. Oh, but seriously, folks.
Seriously, folks.
We have a piece of tape ready from the from your current film, and it's I've seen several clips from it, so I'm not sure which one this is. I think this is one. Yes. Do you know? It's the one in which. Your
part of the
hero is in the
temple sequence,
temple,
and he is going after a statue, a gold statue, and he finally. This is one of the first scenes in the movie.
By the way, I might mention that in this film, an archaeologist apparently there's a race on, really, isn't there? To find
the Lost Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was given to Moses.
And the 10 pieces of the 10 Commandments were supposed to have still been inside.
And they don't want the Germans to get it.
They want to get it before Hitler gets his hands on it. This is on the eve of World War II in 1936. And so it's a race between one man and an entire army.
Yeah. I love the sound of this film. It's a, if the style of it is in any way suggestive of the old Saturday serials, it's not by accident.
Next Saturday.
We have to wait till next Saturday
to find out. Friday night, actually.
I saw him in Sardi's, so I know it comes out all right.
Yeah, right. I don't think you'd ever find Harrison in Sardi's.
I never forget as a kid when I saw a serial in which a guy was shot, and then I saw him later in the Cowboy movie the next week, and I thought, well, that isn't, he's dead. How can he be in the movie the next week?
I like the old serials.
This was last summer, I think. I was not very sophisticated about movies. But
all the serials I love are the ones where you really get your hero into a situation that there is absolutely no way out of, and you have to wait a week to see how he gets out of it, and they forgot to show you one angle, whereas the car went off the cliff in the previous week. The angle they show you on the second week is he opens the door and jumps out. And this doesn't happen in this movie. We answer all of our logic problems are solved as the movie progresses.
Yeah, that wasn't fair. I remember the time when, I think it was in a Jack Armstrong segment, he fell out of a plane and you saw him falling. And the next week he was hanging by his knees in the door of the plane.
Exactly.
But I guess they figured we wouldn't remember.
No, a week of amnesia.
That must have been full of hazards, this film. I've seen other clips from it. I haven't seen the movie yet. Where did you run into danger and trouble on this one, if anything? You blew up things, you had a lot of stunts.
We blew up things, we had a lot of stunts, we had a lot of people involved, a lot of extras in Tunisia. We had over 600 extras working a archaeological dig, which in itself was hazardous because it was 135 degrees in the shade every day, and we were all suffering from all the things you suffer from when you're Lawrence and his army walking through the Sahara, and we were shooting on the tongue of the Sahara. It was the parched tongue of the Sahara. It was an awful experience in Tunisia, but I guess the scariest part of making the movie was the fact that it was a sequence where Harrison Ford and Karen Allen are thrown into a chamber with 7,000 live snakes.
Yes, I thought that was a press agent's invention when I read about that, but and how did they decide on 7,000 and not 6,000 or 6,500?
Well, at first we budgeted 2,000 snakes, but the problem was when you put the 2,000 live snakes on the floor, they all huddled into a corner, and it looked like just a little dust swept under the rug. Realized to cover the entire floor of the set, with a rather large set, we would need about 7,000 snakes.
Who has those available in the Yellow Pages? How do you get the...
It was the British Yellow Pages, and they came from all over the place. They came from Scandinavia, they came from France, they came from Germany. A lot of them were garter snakes, but a lot of the more deadly snakes, the cobras, we got from India, and we got the boa constrictors, I'm not sure from where, and the pythons came in.
Is there a snake wrangler?
We had many snake wranglers in the film. We had 4 of them. They were always being bitten by everything but cobras, of course, because that's deadly, but the pythons were going after everybody. And in the movie, when something bites and snaps and grabs hold of a character, that's a python. And those are real teeth, and that's a real actor going, why am I here, and why did I make this movie?
Yes,
that's really happening. That's not fake.
You can see Karen in one scene, I think, that I saw, maybe it was an outtake. It was, documentary style.
Yeah.
And she shrieks and looks down like something bit her on the leg. Did she get bitten at all? Or?
She wasn't bitten. She was terrified all through the movie because of the snakes. She hated snakes, as did everybody else, most everybody else. And when she got involved in the movie, she couldn't scream loud enough, because sometimes when you're terrified, you go to scream, rather than the noise coming out, it's
yeah, that's right. A real scream.
It's a real. And nothing came out, so I thought I needed something to get some. So when she least expected it, I dropped a snake from the scaffold overhead, and it came around her neck, and she let out a scream that I was able to use in all through the movie. I made 11 copies of the scream and kept cutting it in. That's a good scream. That last scream, she'll never beat that one. And it was a terrible, cruel trick to play on her, but ever since then, she never looked up when she didn't see me around the set. She would always look up when I wasn't around. It was
widescreen.
Yeah, yes, it's sort of a method. Method acting, method directing, it's kind of a...
Did you mean that there are people who will pay to let a snake bite, can be paid to... All bites were accidental, were they?
All bites, yeah. Our assistant director had a very severe bite on his hand by a python who wouldn't let go. They had to actually walk over and give a little flick on the snake's tail, and the shock wave went up to the snake's head, and then he decided to let go.
Is that what you do if a python bites you?
You give him a little
flick on the tail?
Little gentle flick on the table. But the English, the British, are so amazing. I mean, they endure so many things. And David Tomlin, who was bitten by the snake, just walked around the stage saying, help, please. Help. Help, please. So, can't get this bleeding thing off me. You know, it was like that. And it was amazing. I mean, what they survived.
Can't help noticing I'm about to die.
Yeah, right.
They're so polite sometimes, it's irritating.
So polite, so polite. It was great working in England. It's a wonderful place to make movies.
Is it? More so than here?
No, it's sort of the same here, but it was a new experience for me because there's just a gentleman. It's like when you shoot skeet or trap. It's so much better shooting European trap than American trap, and it's that way in making movies. There's just something classy about it. They dress in sport jackets and ties. And
well, I know exactly what you mean. Stephen, we've run out of time, and I wish we had a lot more. Maybe we can do another show.
Sure.
Well, Steven Spielberg is the man to see if you have snakes who can act.
Snake bites,
See you next time. Good night. Next to me has been making movies since almost as long as he can remember, I suppose. First with the family's 8mm movie camera. He went slightly farther than that to make films like Jaws and Close Encounters and so on. And he's here now talking about movies and the making of them, and this is the second part of two programs, the first part of which you may have seen last night or a month ago, as these things go. But anyway, it was so interesting last time that I wanted to have him back to talk some more. So if you would welcome Steven Spielberg, I'd be happy. Speaking of close encounters, have you personally had one of any kind or seen a UFO? If anything in the sky is a UFO until it's identified.
Until it's identified, yeah. Anything on the ground is also a UFO until identified.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never seen a UFO by the popular definition of something that doesn't fall into the parameters of you know, everyday science. I've seen things in the sky that I thought were UFOs and I hoped were UFOs, but turned out to be helicopters or launches from the Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Yeah, it's always disappointing when you find out that they were something else.
Yeah, I had to. It's funny because I have had such a yen to see one. I almost feel a little guilty that I've got Columbia to pay $18 million to let me see one of my own.
I may have once. I saw something that took the quick, the right angle turn.
Oh,
that's
yes,
always part of this.
exactly.
That no aircraft could take, and so on, and then vanish from sight. Do you know that Jimmy Carter, I think when he was governor, reported officially, wherever you send the man, I guess to the Air Force,
I
two
read
sightings
those reports.
that he made?
I read his reports, and I also was, the American Film Institute was having a benefit at the White House, and there was a receiving line, and Mr. Carter was greeting a lot of people from Hollywood, and I was on the line with George Lucas and some other people, and it was my turn to shake his hand. I said, you know, I'm amazed at your UFO reports when you were governor of Georgia, and I've read all about them. And he cut me off, and he sort of said very politely, well, I'm certain that your movie is a lot more interesting than my reports. And that was all I could get out of him about it.
Yeah, you don't want, when you're in politics, people going around saying, he sees flying saucers, you know. But I sure would love to see one. And I don't think, though, that I would do what I read you would do.
What's that?
That is go on the space shuttle if you could get space at in one of their early flights. Now, this may have been a columnist's dream.
Yeah, I think it was a columnist. I think what I said was that there are several people I know who I would like to send up on the space shuttle.
Oh, that's different.
But I would.
It's amazing how a few words can change a quote.
You can change your whole quote entirely, yeah.
Well, when Alfred Hitchcock was sitting more or less where you are, I hit him, as they say, with his allegedly famous quote, or famous alleged quote, actors are cattle. And he said, I'd never say such an insensitive thing. What I said was actors should be treated as cattle. Which is a lot nicer.
A lot nicer, yes, of course.
We talked about Jaws.
Respond to that, yeah.
I took you back to Martha's Vineyard, a place you probably break out into rash, which is even mentioned now because of the long nightmare, really, I guess, of shooting Jaws.
A wonderful place to have a terrible nightmare.
We talked about it at great length before, so I wouldn't do it again. But I did wonder if, had you that film to do over again, can you learn from an experience like that what's wrong, or could the next movie, what am I trying to say?
I mean, if I made Jaws 2, what would I have done that they didn't do that cost them twice as much as Jaws 1?
Yes. Yeah, you should sit here. That's what that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. I would have shot the film in a tank, actually, a lot of the more difficult sequences, and wouldn't have bothered. There's a tank at MGM that's huge, biggest one really in the world.
Yeah.
And I think I would have shot most of the close-up work in a tank.
I know of ironic things like that, where they've gone to great expense to do something in a real place, and then when they screen it, someone says, it looks artificial. Was that done in the studio?
Exactly.
Exactly. The background is painted, isn't it? So, no, it's the sky.
It's the real thing, yeah. That's nothing worse than hearing that after you've come off of 7 months making a movie and somebody says, well, you know, this would be a lot easier to shoot in a doughboy in someone's backyard. And you just...
A doughboy being, of course, a
wading pool.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell anything from... You did one movie that people didn't flock to, 1941 was the name of the movie, I mean, not when you made it.
They flocked in Europe.
They
flocked to it in Europe.
It
does, but they didn't speak English, and the film was in English, so I'm not quite sure what they were flocking for, but they flocked to the movie in Europe. Matter of fact, it made most of its money back overseas.
How do you explain that? I like the posters for it, I like the...
Explain why they flocked to Europe or why it flopped in this country.
Why in this country? Well, I wasn't going to use such a harsh word as flop.
It's my movie. I can say anything I want.
Why was it such a turkey in this country?
Thank you very much.
That's a lot nicer.
I wouldn't have used that word. Well, it essentially, I can't, it's real hard to analyze what went wrong with the picture, except the story didn't work and none of the characters were likable and there was nothing to identify with, and it was too long. But aside from that, I'm very proud of a lot of the movie. I'm very proud of the dance sequence, which is like right in the middle of the film. And I was so happy with the dance sequence when it was over that I was really angry with myself for not making the entire film a musical. I think it would have taken the onus off of... There was an essential meanness about the movie that I think people resented, plus the fact that the film was sold as a spectacular when it was really a spectacle. And it was sold as a comedy along the lines of Airplane, when it really wasn't that much of a comedy, nor was it ever intended to be.
Well, that could be fatal if you...
There was a real...
People weren't expecting to laugh more than they get to.
Exactly, and they wanted to laugh every 30 seconds, and in fact, they got to laugh every 10 or 15 minutes.
And then they wonder if they're supposed to be laughing at what's there or not getting it.
And they see funny people, but they wonder why they're not being funny, and essentially it wasn't... Not all of it was intended to be as funny as people expected.
With Belushi, you mean, for example?
Well, Belushi I was pretty funny. I mean, I laugh about that when I see it now, on my little cassette at home. But there were other stories. There were too many stories and too many subplots and too many characters, and I think Pauline Kael said it best. She said the film reminded her of having her head in a slot machine for 2 hours. You know? I mean, it's just a wonderful way of putting it. It was a pinball machine, having her head in a pinball machine.
Oh, I like the other one, too. Well, those both good images. I wonder how she knows what that feels like. I have to find out. What do you feel about stunt people? I don't know how often I've confessed publicly that one of the professions I'm sorry I didn't go into among 2 or 3 is being a stuntman. I always wanted to be one. As a kid, I practiced falling out of trees, off garages. Jim McConnell and I used to ride our bikes up ramps and crash them into cardboard boxes, and or borrowed bikes if we could get them. Now, how do you, as we sit here now, which is what, June? Yeah. When you're on tape, you're not in the same month. A lady is suing some movie company for millions for not taking enough precaution in a stunt she was in. A water stunt, I believe. It was annoying the way it was reported on the show, news show I saw, because they didn't tell, what the stunt was. But how do you cover those people? they are taking a chance.
Every movie has a stunt gaffer, a stunt wrangler. You know, we had every film also has fly wranglers and ant wranglers and snake wranglers. We talked about that before from Raiders, but one of the most important functions on a film, especially the size of Raiders, is to have a stunt coordinator. And Glenn Randall was the stunt coordinator on Raiders of the Lost Ark, and his responsibility was to keep everybody safe through a stunt and create an illusion more than an actual fall or an actual drag behind the truck. And in fact, people were being dragged behind trucks and under trucks and falling out of windows and going through windows, and it was filled with close calls. But at the same time, safety is first. Everything is choreographed to the point that I'm pulling my hair out saying we've got to go, we're behind schedule, where you can't rush the stunt people because they will move slower. The faster you push them, the slower they'll go, because their closest friends, their drinking buddies, the guys that go off and do the Miller's commercials when they're through making movies, are the same people who put their lives on the line. And it really is a life situation, life and death situation.
Do you know situations, obviously without naming names and so on, where the stuntmen have been unnecessarily endangered and in fact maimed and killed? I know one lost both legs. Is it Yvonne DiCarlo's husband?
I'm not sure. In the helicopter accident, you mean?
This is two trains.
There was a famous helicopter accident where there was actually, it wasn't a stuntman, he was a cameraman with a special Tyler mount out to the back of a Jet Ranger, the side of a Jet Ranger, and he went too low to another helicopter below him and he lost his legs. And that same man on the making of Catch-22, which sounds really kind of strange, but he was killed in a fall, in a mishap on a B-17, or a B-25, I mean, during the shooting in Mexico. I mean, it's not just stuntmen, it's really the tragedy last week where we lost Boris Segal, a very, very excellent and wonderful director and human being who walked into the back rotor blade of a propeller.
Propeller?
Yeah, he's the man who directed Masada for television.
That's right, the man who directed that Masada was killed that night.
And so, I mean, the hazards making movies are surrounded. There's something that happens when you're making a film, especially with directors and cameramen, and that is when your eye is through the camera, you are taken away to a Never Never Land, a kind of reality Oz. And you suddenly, with the eye glued to the camera, nothing can happen to you. You could be on the edge of a train, looking through a viewfinder, heading towards a tunnel with no clearance, and as far as you're concerned, it's only a movie until everything goes black and then white.
It looks like a movie in there.
Yeah, and I think it's almost the sirens that are calling you, and it's a danger. You have to always be aware that once your eye's in the camera, there are dangers all around.
What films are they where the stuntman was killed and they used it in the movie? Is it not true in Ben-Hur?
I think that's a myth. Nobody died during the chariot sequence in Ben-Hur. That's a very old Hollywood story. Yakima Canutt gaffed the movie, was the stuntman in the film. It's not true. I heard that from Yakima, that no one died in the making of that sequence.
I think he took an unexpected flip or something, perhaps. But
quite often, stuntmen are killed on movies that aren't essentially stunt-oriented, and no one gets hurt on films that are essentially stunt-oriented. It's funny how that occurs sometimes.
What would be an example of that kind of thing? I mean,
well, I don't think anybody was injured during the making of the Burt Reynolds picture that Hal Needham directed.
Not Smokey in the...
Not Smokey, but the other one. The one about the stuntman. Burt played a stuntman.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Hooper.
Hooper, yeah.
Right. I think and in 1941 we had every stunt person in Hollywood, men and women, employed. We had 150 stunt people on our picture. I mean, there were Toyotas in garages a week after we wrapped that movie. I mean, they were on overtime and they worked for months, and 2 months became 4 months. It was insane. And no one was seriously injured. It was amazing, with all the stunts in that.
And yet in other films where that's not
other smaller pictures, and I wish I'm dry for an example, but I know there are many.
Yeah. When somebody has a meteoric career where they make a huge multi-million-dollar success and then another one, and maybe another one, how many flopolas can they sustain, it's an unpleasant thought, and still continue their career? You know what I mean? Well, I mean, obviously you can do one because they say, well, look, money's still rolling in on such and such, and we haven't even sold it to Japan yet. But is there a sort of danger point or cutoff point, or does it all depend on a lot of things?
I don't know, I think the film industry is the only industry in the world where resurrection is a real thing. Where a director who has had a number of flops, who hasn't worked in a couple of years, goes out and makes a movie and he's suddenly resurrected. John Huston is an example of a great filmmaker who fell on some hard times, and in several movies he made that really didn't get public or critical attention, and suddenly came back very, very strong. I mean, this happens all the time. Fred Zinnemann is another example of a filmmaker who I think only gets better with age, but had some lean years. I think there used to be an old saying in Hollywood that you could have 3 bombs before you were retired to the to the old film vault.
Yeah, that was the magic number.
And I really think that Hollywood today is desperate for creative directors and brave directors, brave within a budget, certainly, because that seems to be the big, the goon towers today are shining lights on those of us who have gone over budget. And they're
Goon towers?
Very carefully, yes, the goon towers. Yeah.
What are the goon towers?
Well, you know, like on prisoner of war camps in World War II, the goon towers with the. I had this image of studio executives in goon towers with Klieg lights looking for us at night with our budgets under our arms, going from barracks to barracks, collaborating and figuring out how much we're going to spend.
What does it take to be a director besides the talent to actually direct and shoot the film? You have to have a degree in business and psychology and a few other things.
Should have a degree in business, but most of us don't. It would be helpful. It's also good to have a very strong producer like I had with George Lucas. I was very lucky to have somebody as strong as George who was able to keep my budgetary appetite down to a brunch as opposed to a feast.
Have you ever gotten into that position that's legendary in Hollywood where the director's out on the set and the nosy people from the studio come around and start nattering about this and that, and you say, get them the hell out of here, I'm shutting this movie down right now, and that kind of thing? Have you ever gotten to play that scene?
No, I've never played that scene before. But that scene's been played out many times. John Ford's favorite scene, most famous scene, was when the executives came to the set to complain that he was a day behind schedule, and Ford snapped his fingers and said to his script person, give me the script, and the person gave John the script. He opened to the pages he was shooting and ripped them out and threw them over his shoulder and said, we're back on schedule, and walked away.
I know, I love that. That's one of the best. I hope that's true. If it's not, don't tell me.
There should be. Yeah.
I like that story too much.
But no, it's we were talking about before. The executives are really in a very tenuous position, as are the movie makers, and they're trying to find a common ground for some sort of responsible cooperation between filmmakers and budgets, and that's really what it comes down to, because the bank gives you the money to make a movie, and they expect you to bring the picture in reasonably on budget and on schedule, and that recently has gotten out of hand. I'm certainly one of the responsible villains in my early years, but the 2 big successes I had seem to forgive the fact that both Jaws and Close Encounters went over, but they made so much money that everybody forgets how far they went over. 1941, which didn't make enough money, everybody suddenly is calling attention to it because it didn't redeem itself at the box office.
Yeah. Somebody wanted to know, while we were off the air, why you would go back to a movie that was finished apparently satisfactorily and want to add more to it and make more. I don't ever know if that's having been done before, has it? I mean, the Close Encounters have been released, it had been a success and so on, and yet you
I went back to do it again. I would sure like to see it done on the opposite Close Encounters issue, where it's not a success and the studio gives you $1 million to add fuel to the fire, or to to hopefully not throw good money after bad, but to change the movie that way. I felt that I hadn't made the Close Encounters that I really set out to make. And it was just a personal feeling I had all through it. I was dissatisfied with not all the movie, but a portion of the film, because I wrote more script than I had film and money to shoot with. And Columbia was desperate to have the film released by November 17th or 16th in New York and Los Angeles. And I was backed into an impossible deadline, and I didn't have enough time to really polish the picture. And essentially all the changes I made with a special edition of Close Encounters are editorial changes. I shot 3 extra scenes and reinstated a few that I shot earlier that were not in the original movie, like Richard's breakdown in the bathtub with the shower on him. But several things were shot, like the discovery of the ship in the in the Gobi Desert. That was a special shot that we went out for, and I was able to really go back to my initial vision, which was the Close Encounters I wanted to make back in '74 when I first began writing the script.
Did any critic notice anything missing from the first version that was in fact what you thought the movie lacked?
The first version?
Yeah.
No, but there was sort of a unanimous opinion that Richard tearing up the plants in his house and throwing them into the room to build the mountain went on a little bit too long. It was perhaps a little too indulgent on all of our parts, especially mine. That I cut out, but I would have trimmed that for obvious reasons. It suddenly fell out of balance with all the cuts I had made in the second act. When I got to that scene, I said, well, there's just no longer any room in the picture for it.
Well, last time you were here, we were talking about Raiders of the Ark and the idea that it's inspired by or pays homage to or whatever the old Saturday serials. Has this been a long, cherished desire to make something like that and that you never took seriously until now? Well,
actually, I took it seriously. I'm now taking it seriously, but for a long time I thought I was making George Lucas's fairy tale, his yen to see something that he was brought up with, as we all were. Of course, we were too young to go back to the late 40s and be aware when the serials were made from Republic and like Tailspin Tommy and Commander Cody and Don Winslow in the Navy and Spy Smasher, those great serials that I only was able to see in revival matinees in Phoenix, Arizona on weekends. When I was 11, 12 years old, they had revival matinees, and that's where I discovered the serial. But George goes even further back with serials, and he's always loved adventure movies. And George essentially told me the story in Hawaii in '77, and I thought it was a great story and wanted to do it. And only then did I get caught up in this sort of, popcorn adventure.
George Lucas of Star Wars
and Empire Strikes Back.
Other things, it's too bad Gail Sondergaard isn't in it. It seems like there was never a serial that Gail Sondergaard wasn't the mean, the villainous in.
Yeah, but and Conrad Veidt, it would be wonderful to see him. In the serial. But we have some pretty villainous people. Ronnie Lacey plays sort of a present-day Peter Lorre, and he plays Tod, which means death in German, and then we have a really good actor named Paul Freeman, a British actor, who plays our champagne villain, Belloc. And they're all kind of throwbacks to an earlier, more innocent era when bad guys were bad and they were arch, and good guys were heroic. And I think what makes this movie a little more original is that Harrison Ford has frailties. He's heroic, but he, bullets aren't stopped. They go right through him.
Nice thing to have. When we were talking about sneaking into studios too last time, when you watched a director like Hitchcock, when you managed to sneak in and see your heroes, I suppose it's safe to say, work, what can you learn from that? What did you see Hitchcock do?
Well, the strange thing about Hitchcock was he didn't do much of anything, which I thought was his genius. He sat in the chair and all the actors came to him. He once in a while crooked a finger like this. And at one point when I was watching Torn Curtain, I was very, very young, Julie Andrews came over to him and they talked for what seemed like 20 minutes, but they talked in whispers, nose to nose. And then she went and played the scene brilliantly. And then after that, I remember Hitchcock doing the same thing with Bruce Dern and Barbara Harris in Family Plot. I was watching a few minutes of the shooting of Family Plot, and he didn't say very much to them, but it just seemed to me that he knew what he wanted. He plans everything in his head and on paper, and then, as Hitchcock has said many times, he doesn't enjoy physically making a movie. It's physically very debilitating. He never enjoyed that.
He liked the planning and...
He already shot the movie up here, and it was all done. It was already in theaters, but he had to come to work at 6 o'clock every morning and get the actors to do what the scenario in his head told them to do.
Do you believe him when he said that he'd never looked through a camera?
I don't know. I've read a lot about Hitchcock. I've never met the man, but I don't know. I'm sure he's looked through a camera, especially in his earlier years.
Yeah, he said on a show I did with him, he said, I've never looked through a camera. He may have meant while I'm shooting. I don't look through at the shot the way some directors do, but he said he'd never seen through one.
But could you tell when he was pulling your leg and when he was being sincere?
Yes, he had a very sly manner about him that was very funny and very nice. And I don't know if he was ever tyrannical or not. You never
every director gets tyrannical no matter how calm they are. I've seen the nicest, calmest people crack under the pressure. Everybody at some point goes a little bonkers. They have to. I mean, it's just a natural release.
When Otto Preminger gets nice occasionally, they get
different.
Worried.
Yes.
Okay. Our director's friends, the way I mean that is that I had a symphony conductor on one time who, quite frankly and admirably, said, that we aren't really friends, other conductors, because the competition between us is so fierce that you can't really somehow afford to be. You'd think that might be true among movies, but...
You would. All the directors I know are friends to the point that they bare their chest and show their rough cuts to each other. Now, if friends, that's friendship. When somebody says, well, look, this is hot off the press, and I hope you guys like it, and if you hate it, tell me what you hate about it, and I can fix it. And we show each other our rough cuts, and that takes a lot of, I think, trust to go ahead. I mean, it's the toughest audience is another director.
Toughest audience.
Toughest audience is another filmmaker. Yeah. But it's not cliquish. It's sort of an open forum for anybody who wants to, become a friend. All you have to essentially do is, send your card or letter to, post office box, and it's a very nice situation.
Yeah. Stephen, is there a kind of film that you feel guilty about not making? There are people whose work is a philosophical statement about mankind and that kind of thing. Do you ever feel that you make successful movies, but that you really ought to be getting, or does anyone give you this advice, that really, why don't you get serious now and really make a movie about life?
Life, yeah. Life through everything but my sunglasses, my pink glasses, I get a lot of that. The Europeans like to write a lot about when am I going to make my little personal movie. And I'm not quite sure what that means. Does that mean, I'm always afraid if I make a small personal movie in let's say, a bedroom, and there's a crazy quilt with many colors in the bed, I'll be accused of too much production value. So,
make it black and white.
Make it black and white, thank you. No, I'd like to. I'm making a picture called A Boy's Life next, this coming August. And it's all about children. And it all takes place in 3 rooms of a house and a schoolyard. And it's all about kids, and I'm very anxious to make that one.
Will that qualify maybe as the small movie the Europeans think you ought to make?
Yeah. I'm not making it for the Europeans. I'm sort of making it because I've always wanted to work with children, short of having them. And so it's.
I wonder if that's better than working with birds. Hitchcock was funny. He was willing to name names of the birds that were the worst to work with.
Sparrows.
The gulls.
The gulls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless he said the girls.
He probably said the girls.
No, he didn't have that accent. But apparently the gulls ripped everybody up and got more people than your snakes do.
Well, children do the same thing. They can rip up a lot of... kids never censor anything. They say exactly what's on their minds the moment they think it comes out. And then as they become adults, they start to pull back because they have to join a kind of responsible conservative society. But it's great to work with kids because you really hear from them what they think.
I wonder if there's any truth in children being natural actors. Certainly all children aren't, because you see some lousy acting by children, but you also see some wonderful...
I think all the lousy acting from children are children who in fact are actors. And all the great acting I've seen from children are children who really don't yet know what a mark is and how to hit their key light and how to stand just a little forward of the leading man so the leading man can't be seen by the camera. I mean, they haven't learned those tricks yet.
They haven't learned to look in the down camera eye so more of their face gets on the screen.
Exactly. And, they haven't learned how to upstage. But, no, I think children are very natural. All the children I've ever worked with, Kerry Guffey in Close Encounters and the boys, the 2 young boys from Jaws, and now in my picture, they're essentially relative newcomers and unknowns.
We have very little time left again. I have 3 or 4 films that I'll always watch if they're on the Late Show or at a festival nearby. Lifetime favorites like The Third Man and others. Yeah. Do you have a little handful of ones like that?
I have an apple barrel full of them.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, but I mean, among my favorite films, I'll watch any time The Searchers.
The Searchers?
Yes, and I'll watch anytime. And It's a Wonderful Life. Anytime it's on, Christmas, summer, whenever it's on, I'll watch that.
Topper is a wonderful comedy. Who directed that? Do you know?
Not so.
Marvelous film. I didn't realize how funny it was.
Get my New York Times review of books.
That might be one that goes in that collection. I haven't seen it enough times yet to be sure. Well, Steven Spielberg, thank you for making the time pass so quickly. Both here and in the movie theaters.
That's right. Blink of an eye, it's over.
Blink of an eye. See you next time. Good night.